international conferences and authored journal articles on information design and design education. Just to give you an indication of her spread, she was the Wayne State University Principal Investigator for the US FIPSI grant entitled Seeing the Body Elsewise, Connecting the Life Sciences and the Humanities. She's a member of several professional organizations such as Design Research Society, AIGA, and College Art Association. Professor Geoff has a 50% appointment as faculty liaison to the Computing and Information Technology Division at Wayne State, and a position he has held since August 2002. He's also a full professor of linguistics within the English department. It says 50%, but I know that in each complexity Geoff works 100%, so I don't know how he does it. That's why he's losing weight. As a linguist, he's one of the originators of the field of cognitive phonology, which is absolutely a brilliant achievement. And he published a textbook and numerous articles on the topic. A recent area of interest is the relationship between language and music. So he's coordinating a theme session on that topic at the upcoming International Cognitive Linguistics Conference in Edmonton in June. He serves on the web committee of the Linguistic Society of America and the advisory board of Linguist List. In his IT capacity, he serves as a liaison between the Wayne State University faculty and CNIT, reporting to the CIO. His work includes dealing with all aspects of IT, including the development of Blackboard, the email system, and the campus portal. The second area of IT responsibility is in security and privacy policy and practice. And for several years, he has been developing Wayne State University policy on protection and classification of data. He served on class council, the class budget committee, and is currently chair of the presidential committee on record retention and management. His interest in serving on class council and the budget committee because he would like to increase the range of opinions on such committees, because too often he thinks discussions tend to become us against them. He prefers to take a more collaborative approach to governance, in which faculty and administration comes to solve problems together. Tim Spannaus is a program coordinator and senior lecturer in instructional technology. He's also director of the Graduate Certificate in University Teaching. He teaches courses in instructional design, especially for online learning, asset design, and university teaching. Tim has been president of two professional organizations, the Association for Development of Computer-Based Instructional Systems and the International Board of Standards for Training, Performance, and Instruction. The latter organization elected Tim a fellow. Tim's research and publications are in the area of teaching and learning, especially the use of digital media. His most recent book is Creating Video for Teachers and Trainers, published by Wiley & Son last year. I still have a little minute to say something as director of this Humanity Center. I want to give a big shout out to the people who are participating in this program today. Margaret Winters and Geoff Nathan has been friends of this Humanity Center in a practical way for many years. By practical, I mean that many people say nice things about the center, but they never actually do much. They don't sign up for the talks, they don't come to our events. Not so with these two. Even though they both come here in senior capacities, they have participated in the programs. This is in fact Geoff and Margaret's 7th Runback appearance here. They started in 2003, giving a paper on many ounces, how many ounces in the Stanley Cup, on butter sports, trophies, and categories. And over the years, they've given talks on a tale of two worlds, the IT and faculty worldviews. And this was a very important talk in which they attempted to bring a rapprochement between these two important sides. And such talks as how sums are stored and the semantics are applied in linguistics and elsewhere. So over the years, they've been very good friends with the Center, and I thank them very much. And I thank you for coming, and I ask you to welcome these three professors, Professor Nathan, Professor Moldenhauer, and Professor Spannaus to the podium, collectively with applause.
Thank you. It's good to see so many people here, and there are a few more seats here.
Yes,
So.
yes.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Just a little bit of an introduction about what we've been doing and what we're going to share with you. Through the support of the Humanities Center, Geoff and Tim and I formed a working group to collectively explore the impact of people's knowledge of words and images on how information is visualized. In other words, what information looks like. We have been looking at the ways people think about and process information and how that knowledge translates into decisions about size, shape, placement, sequence, and all that kind of stuff. And we brought knowledge from our respective disciplines together to discuss the use of visual metaphors, perception, usability, learning theories, information design principles, and visual hierarchy, and examined how all of these things affect the way that people create meaning from their physical experiences and develop semological systems to encode and communicate those experiences. It's a lot, but we'll show you how that will be. Thus, the visualization of information is ultimately about relationships, the grouping, the flow, the pacing of information. To apply these ideas to a specific situation, we have, with the assistance of the Wayne State Registrar, been reworking the add and override approval form to focus on how both words and visual elements can shape the ability of people to navigate information and perform specific tasks. We have discovered that there are many layers of interpretation required and challenges to understanding the sequence of steps. Who does what and when, and these that are needed to complete this form. In this presentation, we will be sharing our working process and the current prototype of a new design for the form. You see an enlarged version of it back there, and we'll refer to that at the end of our presentation here. And we welcome any comments that you have about our work to this date. I'd also like to say that in one of our meetings, while we were talking about all of this, Tim said, what we really also want to communicate is how the three of us arrived in the same place talking about this, but from three different places. And that's really the very exciting part of this interdisciplinary work that we have done. I want to especially thank Linda Falkowitz, the Wayne State Registrar, Nancy McQuaid, the Associate Registrar for Records and Registration, and Adela Perez, the Manager for Registration, for their enthusiasm and support for our work on the add and override approval form. Their patience with our questions, which have been many, and their insights into the procedure for processing the form have really been invaluable. And we'll be talking about some more of the input that we've received from them as well. So, our presentation is going to begin with Geoff's.
We're going to do a kind of tag team
Right.
presentation here. So I'll start with some of my linguistic background. Some of you have heard me talk about some of the fundamental concepts in cognitive grammar before, and for some of you this will be repetition. For some of you, on the other hand, it'll be new and I hope interesting. I've been excuse me, strongly influenced by the work, particularly of Mark Johnson, the philosopher, and George Lakoff, the linguist, who over the last 20 or so years, maybe a bit more now,
1980.
since 1980, yeah, that's a few more than 20, have been looking at the centrality of metaphor, not just in art, not just in poetry, where you may have learned about metaphor in high school poetry, but in the fundamental structure of how we use and understand ordinary everyday language. And I'll use that as a kind of entry to talking about visual information processing. But I'll start first with just the plain ordinary language stuff. So I'll give you some examples that I pulled off the CNN website from a couple of weeks ago. I think this was March the 17th. And notice, for example, I just said I pulled off the CNN website. Of course, I didn't pull anything off anything. I read the CNN website as it was displayed on a screen, and I blocked and copied. Blocked, notice metaphorically, of course, also because, of course, I didn't touch the screen. But nonetheless, I understand, and you understand that that's what I did, and I copied it and pasted it, but I didn't use much paste. I mean, these seem obvious and trivial, but just to get, sorry, jumped ahead of myself here. Let me give you an example earlier than that. Just the word over, which has, I think for a lot of us, this is a chapter in George Lakoff's work based on the work of one of his former students. Just look at the word over. It's polysemous, to use a linguistic term. It has a lot of different meanings, but they're not random. In fact, they're systematically structured. They're all based on an essential central visual image. So we can turn the page over, and so you have this image of a semicircular or a circular movement. And similarly for the pillar toppled over. On the other hand, if we say the show is over, you think of the show as metaphorically going through a cycle of up and around and over, and then you can push this metaphor further and say, I'm so over my girlfriend, where the idea is that your relationship is going along this similar metaphorical trajectory. But on the other hand, if I tell you to do your homework over, I want you to go around the bottom and go back over and around the circle again. I'm not saying you necessarily think of all of these, but there's no doubt that that's where all of these meanings come from. And then, of course, we papered over our differences, where you could imagine that there's a hole in the wall, and you can paper over the hole. And in fact, if you think about the fundamental meaning of the word over, it seems to involve orientation with respect to the force of gravity. So if something is over, it's located here with respect to the force of gravity. So you know, this projector is over the table. But on the other hand, if there's a hole in the ceiling, and I get some paper and some glue, I can certainly put a patch over the hole, and you have no trouble understanding that, even though, of course, I've just 180 degrees rotated the image, and we rotate images in that way all the time, retaining the fundamental shape and then mentally rotating them, or doing metaphorical extensions as well. So here's some examples. As I say, I scraped off the CNN website on March the 27th. The headline said that the discussion was in the justice's hands. I doubt very much that the justice's hands actually touched anything except perhaps a computer keyboard. But the blurb underneath said a majority of justices raised questions. Of course, they didn't raise physically, but again, we have no trouble understanding this. Indicating support for tossing a key part of the Defense of Marriage Act. I bolded every one of the metaphors in here, and I realized after I was looking at this last night that there were several more metaphors there too. Let me see, deny. Support, thank you, yes, of course. Indicate, originally meant point out, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean point out now, but it does come from the word, I believe, for finger, index. So you get the all of language, and this is English, but we could do exactly the same thing with Chinese or Walbury or any language in the world. All languages in the world do this. This is how we understand the world. We take concrete stuff and we take abstract stuff and understand it in terms of the concrete stuff by setting up relationships between things in the concrete stuff that can correspond to things in the abstract stuff, like raising a question, meaning it comes up in front of our eyes, and therefore since our eyes understand or become aware, we've made some concept come to our awareness by raising a question up into our visual field. So these are linguistic examples, and we could talk for hours and hours about this, and thousands of pages have been written about this, but it turns out that metaphors are not just linguistic, they're also visual, and the web is filled with visual images. So here's a couple. As I said, metaphor permits abstract entities to be understood in more concrete or more everyday terms. So for example, if you go to CNN, I spent a lot of time in CNN website, as you can tell, you'll see that across the top there are tabs. That's a metaphor for file folders and a filing cabinet set out with tabs so that you can find them and look at them. We have no trouble understanding this and clicking on them. And Microsoft Word in its latest incarnation with the ribbon has exactly the same set of tabs that you click on it and a different page opens up. And of course we also have buttons that light up when you hover over them, just like a button on a, I don't know, an airplane or a car or a cash register or something. There's also drop-down menus that are a little bit like Rolodexes. I've been trying to think of what exactly drop-down menus are metaphors for, and it's not completely clear to me. We have no trouble understanding the idea. Maybe they're more like scrolls, you know, old-fashioned pre-book scrolls that you read through. A much more complex metaphor that I think is kind of cool are the slider bars on any kind of extended document structure, whether it's Microsoft Word or anybody else's. PDF files work the same way, where there is, I'll use the mouse to point out here, we have this slider bar, and it's technically a blend. I won't go into the concept of blends, that's another concept that cognitive linguists have been wrestling with. But it shows you two things at once. Simultaneously, it shows you your progress through the document in terms of vertical extent, and here's where you are partway through this document. So it tells you how far along in the document you are by a vertical extension corresponding to extension into the article. Notice the whole idea of length in reading something is metaphorical. But the other thing is it also tells you how long the document is. Because this orange bar here, and if we look at this other document here, which is only 1 page long, you can see that this orange bar fills the entire space, telling you there is just this much to read. Whereas if you're over here, you can see this is an enormous document. It's a 40-page paper, and so the little indicator bar is tiny. And that's not an accident. That is telling you how big the document is compared to what you've got to read. We have no trouble processing this and understanding it. It just comes naturally with understanding this visual metaphor of progress through a document. And I believe we have run out of time. And space.
Or slides.
And space.
Each of us brings our own distinctive essential literature to the problems that we're looking at. Because of my work in digital media and online study, the work that I'm most familiar with that relates to this kind of work and visual display of information is from the multimedia literature. Key among those would be work by Richard Mayer. And depending on which version of his stuff you're reading, he's got 7, 8, 9, 10 principles that he applies to the design of multimedia, many of which apply to any display of visual information. So he talks about the importance of proximity, for example. If you've got text and an image that belong together, that refer to the same thing, they should be located physically together on a page or in time in a multimedia piece. They should occur, the voiceover narration with the verbal content and the image should appear at the same time. We're all sitting there nodding, saying, of course. But you know that publishers don't necessarily pay attention to that. You're reading a book, and it refers to figure 2, and you're on 2 facing pages of plain text, and figure 2 is a flip of a page away somewhere. And what Mayer is saying is that notion of separating the visual content from the verbal content inhibits learning, because you've got to turn away from it, remember what the verbal content is, look at the image, study the image to see what the match is, remember the image, come back to the verbal content and try to figure it out. And Mayer is saying, put those things together. We know it, but publishers don't always pay attention to it. Very good publishers do. Working in the same area would be John Sweller, and John Sweller is known for cognitive load theory. Both of these deal with perception. In cognitive load theory, Sweller posits that there are 3 different working areas in working memory that are related to germane load, extraneous load, and intrinsic load. Intrinsic load is the load that's imposed by the content itself. How complicated is it? What are the number of relationships among entities within that derives how complex it is. Germane cognitive load is what is the space or capacity of working memory that we can dedicate to processing this task. And extraneous cognitive load is load imposed by poor design. So that if you've got poorly designed visual media, you spend way too much time processing it, and that takes working memory capacity away from the germane cognitive load that we need to work on. And Sweller, getting beyond these definitions of cognitive load, then produces a series of guidelines for reducing extraneous cognitive load. Some of his guidelines overlap with Mayer, but both of them provide very useful content to help us design how do we display information visually so that people can perceive it accurately and efficiently and use very limited working memory to process it. I just highlighted the authors there. There's a lot of work by both Sweller and Mayer that's available. The Clark and Mayer book is specifically around e-learning. But what Ruth Clark does in that book, as she does with many of her books, is to work with somebody who's done a lot of the research and come up with a practitioner-focused work that everybody can understand. In the other one, Mayer is the editor, and then Sweller does the same thing with Ruth Clark in the third book. Getting beyond the literature, we look at what are the processes that we use to figure out how to display information visually. And part of our way of working in instructional technology, as well as information technology, the other IT, is usability testing. We can apply everything that we know about design, but until we actually try it out with the end users or the learners, we really don't know that we've done the best job that we can. We can try it out with users or learners and identify what the problem areas are and improve it. So that's part of our way of working. We also have a series of heuristics or rules of thumb to help us design visual media well, including CARP, contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity, which are guidelines to help us figure out where things should go on a page or on a screen, as well as the notion of figure and ground and gestalt and several others. But these, not necessarily research-based, but practitioner-focused ways of thinking about visual media that help us do a better job and help our learners or users perceive the media in the way that we want and get the information from it. Another heuristic when you're writing directions on a form or on a screen is to tell the learner or user why they want to do something before you tell them what it is they're supposed to do. What that allows the user to do is to scan a page looking at the first line to say, I'm looking for the task that I want to perform right now, and then scan across to the right to see what it is you're supposed to do, rather than having all the directions and you have to read through the whole sentence to find out why would I want to do that, or do I want to do that. It's a very simple guideline, but one that you find many, many violations of just going around screens on Wayne State systems. Just to pick a spot. Another one, if you've got a list of actions that you can take on a page, is use parallel syntax. We've got many lists, that may be a familiar one to you, where it's mostly nouns, and then interspersed in there will be an occasional verb, like instead of class list, it says download class list, and all the rest of them are nouns. Right? Fortunately, C and D are close together in a list and you can find them. But it's a lot easier just to use parallel syntax all the way through, and the user knows exactly what to look for, rather than trying to guess how did they phrase this link. That would be yours.
Right.
I went through mine quickly.
Okay.
Left you plenty of time.
Thanks. Well, what you've heard Geoff and Tim talk about really comes into play very much with information design. Issues of how you visualize things and also how people move through information. And in terms of the area of information design, these are some literature sources I would cite. Jacobson's book is an anthology. It really was sort of like the first book that talked about and set up this field of information design and helped people understand that this was really important stuff that needed to be addressed. The next one by Edward Tufte, this is his one book. He has written, his first book was called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. And over the years he went on and refined that thesis. And this one, Envisioning Information, I think is the best one that encapsulates the principles he's talking about. And here he's really looking at how, again, we take information and make it understandable. And the idea that there are many ways to understand things. And Ware's book is really a book really trying to explain how important it is for designers to be also involved in processes for developing things for other kinds of disciplines. And then the Burke and Wilbur book shows you many examples of information design, both in terms of wayfinding, in other words, signage, and things that are three-dimensional and things that are two-dimensional. For example, instructions. In talking about information design, and I find with my students that initially when I talk about information designers say that, I get kind of blank looks. But after a while, when I start explaining what it does and that it's something that's involved in your everyday life, the light bulb goes on. And the idea with information design is that it does three things, essentially. It helps people find, understand, and use information. And some things around us maybe help us find things, but then you're lost. Okay? Other things might help you understand things, but you have a terrible time finding it. And then you might be able to use something eventually after going through everything else. I'm sure you've all encountered websites that you gave up on in desperation, forms you'd like to rip apart. And so what good information design does is help you move through this seamlessly so that you're not frustrated about things. And thus, as I said, information design is user-centered. That it's really about how people use information. As designers, we don't go off in the corner and make magic. But it's important that the design comes out of the experiences of people that we're designing for. Otherwise, we're just sort of, who knows, you know, if it works, fine, if it doesn't, it doesn't. And that gets back to the user testing that Tim talked about. And so that the choices that designers, information designers make about type and image and pictures and all of that stuff really is in response to what people need as visual signals. So what Geoff was talking about, visual metaphors, to help people understand how to use information and move through it. So information design is really about storytelling. So what we're trying to do here is combine the story of the information, what it is that's trying to be communicated to people, and a person's individual story to create a new way of understanding, create a new story. And something that especially each individual can find a way to latch onto. And essentially, the information design should be something that can be personalized for people. And so the way we do that with design and the choice of type and image and such is to look at the hierarchy of information. And one of the most important things when you're trying to design something is to figure out what it is that really needs to be communicated. It's very easy for people to say, well, this is important, and that's important, and that's important. Well, it's all very important, but there's got to be one thing that's the center of what you want people to understand first and foremost. The other stuff will be there, but what the designers then do in consultation with the people who use this is figure out how to communicate what's first, second, third, and so on. And so the visual choices that the designers make with type weight and space and all of those things are elements that signal the hierarchy. They're things that help you move through the information. So that choices about shape and size and placement, color and space and all of that come together to help you understand the content of the information. And so if you think about what we have all just been discussing, got a little example here of how that kind of thing works. This is just information. It's all one typeface, it's all one weight, there's no differentiation about the information. There are individual elements on lines, that's the clue. But it could theoretically just be one long string of information. Again, as I tell my students, what we're trying to do here is to help signal information. It's as if instead of talking like this in a monotone and everything doesn't have punctuation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what we're doing typographically is to modulate that. So visually thinking about spaces and punctuation and space so that the sensibility of the information comes through. So one element is signaling, change the weight. So suddenly we have one line that is much bolder than the other. So what's the first thing you see? Richard L. Gregory. Okay? Here's another way to signal. Change color. In this way, the color, which is red, then connects Richard L. Gregory to the time and to the fact that it's admission free. So there are different ways to use these things to combine information in different ways. There's a guy named Richard Saul Wurman who had a very famous, at least in information design folks, example of getting getting stuffed dogs of every breed of dog in the world gathered together. And he said, once I have these stuffed dogs, I can organize them according to country of origin. I can then take them and organize them according to the year they were admitted to the American Kennel Club. I could organize them according to the kind of breed that they are. Same dogs, same stuffed animals, but the organization tells you different things about these dogs. So that's what's going on here as well. This is what's called a shift of threshold. So again, and the threshold is the alignment, the left alignment here. Here is the use of line space. All it is one line space to help separate out information, enable you to see it in different ways and make different connections. Here we have multiple thresholds. In this case, 3 alignments to fine-tune that kind of organization and connection between the kinds of information. Here we have size, and I think that's size 1, sorry, weight. And then here, sorry, it's also the weight change and the use of the line space. So again, the finer tuning of the separation of information. And here we have multiple alignments, multiple thresholds, different shifts of spacing, and also rearranging spatially on the page. And then finally, all of it all together. So color and size and weight and space all coming together in different ways to communicate first that it's about Richard L. Gregory, second that the dates and the dates are there. That's the second thing, and that they are connected to the art and technology lectures, and beyond that, the information about what they're about, and then the truly other information about admission free, where it is, and so forth. This design could be done any number of ways. If it was agreed that it was admission free, yes, it's going to be free, then the design would be very different. If it was going to, if you wanted to communicate that the dates were tremendously important, again, the design would be different. And thus, if you wanted to communicate the names of the lectures, that again would be a different design. So that's how information design really, really works. And so what we have done then, again with the help of the registrar, is to look at this add and override approval. Yeah, right. Linda was very helpful. There are 10 different forms from the registrar's office that can be downloaded for use, and so she suggested that we look at this one, which we did. And in meeting with her, then we started to make some kind of comments about what is this stuff really mean, okay? And then this became my initial trying to puzzle it out. And Geoff and Tim have their own sketches that they brought to our conversation. So the first jottings I have is just trying to figure out what it is that students are supposed to do with this form. And it's to add or drop a course. And as you can see, I started to initially chunk out those kind of areas that needed attention, that needed tasks. And that was refined a little bit over to, okay, to add a course, this is what you do, and these are the kinds of components that are breaking into sections until we came to this, okay? And this is a really important thing. It looks like a mess at this point, but this kind of sketching and ideation is critical to what we're doing. We don't just jump immediately on the computer. As I said, we just don't make magic off of how to make magic. And so this is part of the process of trying to figure out really, at this stage, what's needed in the process. So this was our initial draft. And looking at this, what we decided, there needed to be a section for the student. Because in the original form, there was the initial information about the student's name, then there was the department information about how to handle the request, and then there was the information about what the student wanted to have happen. So what we did is realize that all the student information should probably go together, and then the department stuff followed that. The second page then is guidelines for how to use this. The other thing that we were really trying to figure out is how these different classifications that the department uses, what do they mean, and how does that happen? How does the whole process happen? And so we again met with Linda and Nancy and Adele and got more information from them, more feedback about how this works. We're still, again, putting it together because there are different departments do it in different ways. And that's part of the challenge of this whole thing of how do you come up with something that's going to work for all situations. And so this was then one of the things that we got from Adela. After looking at our draft, this was something that she provided us for feedback as to how to simplify it. The biggest, well, as I said, how to use it, or the departments do it differently, but also when this form is used at what point in the semester and under what particular circumstances. Again, things vary. So we're still working on the details of figuring this out. So that's where we are, and we're in progress, we're in process, and we have examples. We have the example of the draft up there so you can see it in larger scale. And that's where we are, and that's what we have done, and we certainly appreciate any kind of feedback you have about what we have done with the forms or anything else about our presentation. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions about the form? Yeah.
No, I have a general comment.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I have somewhat naively written about what I call the myth of the unique user. And so for your announcement, how do you deal with the different needs? I don't know who Morgan is because I'm not in your discipline. The title is actually quite ambiguous because what does pictures mean? I could be somebody that just wants something free to go to, or I could be interested in the dates. And so there are different people with different needs. And so how does one make a decision on how to design it?
Good question. Because, and that's framed really by who you expect to use this. And most of the time, you want to get a sense really of who it is. So yes, they're individuals, but what kinds of tasks are they being asked to do? What kind of information do they need? And part of the research way up front is to find out what those information needs are before we even sort of, begin. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Then what do you do with something like a major piece of software where you're going to have users across cultures, different gender variations,
Right.
different ways they have been brought up, different levels of experience? So in that case, you really don't have the luxury that you just gave me of being able to well-define the people using this piece of software.
That's, you want to...
Yeah, and one of the nice things about software as compared to a form is that it's infinitely customizable. So if a particular user has a way of using the software, they can often change its appearance or change its functionality to suit the way they want to use it. And I'm reasonably sure that if you and I open up Word on our computers, it's not going to look the same. Because I've customized some things about how mine works, because it works better the way I use it. Right? And software is much more customizable. A problem with a form where you've got a piece of paper and trying to get the form to fit the business process that underlies the whole thing. That's why the form is there. And then discovering that people use the form for different purposes in very different ways. That makes the design considerably more complicated. And forms then create a different problem than software does, because we can customize software to a large extent. Forms, to a large extent, are there. And we're looking for how does it fit the business process, because there is an intended use for that form from the registrar's office, and try to have the form support that so that it makes it easier to do it the way that it's intended.
Whatever, and by the way, whatever we would come up with would be tested.
Yeah.
And that's really critical, because we can only see so much right now. We have only so much input, but until it's actually out there and people say, whoa, this doesn't work, or what do you mean by this, we don't know if we're being accurate.
One of the things, just to piggyback on Bob's question, one of the things we had with this form is it has two intended users, two sets of intended users. The students have to fill out some of it, so they have to figure out, what do you mean by those questions? But then it goes to some administrative office, which varies from college to college and department to department, which office it goes to. Some it goes to the dean, some it goes to the registrar, some it goes to the department, some don't even care. But somebody in that unit has to put some check boxes, some checks in those boxes. So we had to wrestle with who's going to understand what these words mean, because various units, it's going to various units depending on your major.
Or not at all. Some
Right,
organizations don't use it.
Right.
It's not essential to the process.
Yeah.
So this looks like it's been designed as a piece of paper. Is there a reason to retain it as a paper form? And how would the design change if you were now making it a purely electronic form with electronic writing?
That is a really good question, because right now it is a downloadable PDF, and some students are supposed to download it, print it out, fill it out, and take it somewhere. Other departments are probably going more towards just dealing with it electronically. So that's something we have to figure out, and a lot is going to depend on where sort of the future of this form is going. Right now, we're dealing with it indeed as a paper thing,
But we
as
have
a PDF thing.
Yeah, we have discussed trying to do it as electronic.
Exactly.
Right. We have explored, CNIT has this thing called workflow.
Right.
That some of you have had experience with if you had to fill out certain kinds of forms, where you fill out a form and click, and then it goes to the next step, and it shows up on somebody else's email or shows up in some kind of inbox. And we've explored a little bit doing that with this form. The problem is every single one of these forms was going to take some person sitting down and doing some programming, which is not free. I mean, printing pieces of paper or making PDFs is not free either, but whatever we do, it's going to cost somebody some time or some programming. So we haven't done it yet. We have talked with the people who design the workflow process at CNIT to see if they might be able to start doing some of this stuff that way and at least reduce the number of pieces of paper.
Yeah,
But
it's a
to-
whole evolution of stuff.
But to get directly to your question as to how would this be different if we're online, one is you can build some intelligence into it. Some of these actions are only valid up to certain dates, others, and beyond that date you can't do it. Well, the form online can know the date and not make certain choices available. where their choice is only one out of the list, that's really easy to enforce. You click this one, nothing else becomes available to you. So you can build some intelligence into it, and to a large extent, make it more error-free, or at least reduce some kinds
Reduce,
of
right.
Yes.
error-free. We're not going to get
Right. Plus, the print version really gives us a template, you know, for moving into the digital, you know, application.
Rich?
Any possible way that you can decide on a single policy that can be applied across? I mean, I know everybody's kind of come up with their own thing, and I know.
You mean with the form?
And yeah, I'm
Or the
smiling.
business process behind it.
Yeah, the business process. I mean, is there one logical, obvious way?
Part of it is,
I know.
The simple answer is probably no.
when do you add a course? Well,
Because-
it depends on where in the semester you are.
Exactly.
But I mean, from a student's point of view, if I have to do this for one, you know, my English class versus my art class versus my math class, and it's
Exactly,
different.
because right now there are
policies.
different departments, so it's different.
So, I mean, as a
Or
student,
different colleges,
it
right?
would be much more convenient if there was only one way to follow. But I don't know if there's any way to.
Have you tried to enforce any kind of policy uniformly across colleges and departments at this university?
Yes,
Oh,
I
Margaret says
failed
yes.
every time.
Now, this is interesting. I have a theory question. It seems to me, I don't know if you've thought about this, that almost everything you said about the design goes back to good design, goes back to iconicity. That you're mapping proximity
Mhm.
or order or temporal order of actions, that the best design forms map them directly.
Size to importance, yeah.
Size to importance would be another one. Have you thought about that from a theory point of view, or is it in?
We haven't said that out loud,
Yes.
Yeah.
but I think it's been in the back of our minds
Exactly.
all along,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because every one of you said something where all I could think of was iconicity.
Similarity between things that are being compared.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
exactly,
two
the
domains.
parallel syntax kind
Yeah.
of
Right.
issue,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what's been kind of nice with the collaboration. As I said, we've, you know, come from different disciplines and have wound up, you know, sort of seeing the same things and realizing, you know, similar issues at work here.
Sometimes you have different terminology around it.
Yeah.
And the way that Judith went through and revised all that information to make a form, I could do much the same exercise, but using different terminology
Absolutely.
based on my literature.
Absolutely.
Right.
And again, with the linguistic metaphor, I could have done exactly the same thing as well.
Not all wound up at the same place, but at least, you know,
Yeah.
redesign the information in various ways.
And I think, I hope you can see in the design of the form where visual metaphor and the issues that Geoff talked about and issues that Tim talked about start to show up. So it really becomes kind of that mix of everything that we've been talking about to hopefully, you know, develop a form that works.
Big fat lines mean two different topics.
Right, I mean, even
For
from a
example.
distance,
Yeah.
you can start to see that these major lines separate out some kind of something. And when you come closer, you see the finer detail of what that is. So the lines become signals, and the spaces become signals as to what is required. And there's an example of how to fill out the information that's needed. So that becomes an example, because, you know, before there was something like that, you know, I have students who would fill it out and it's like, what does this mean, or what does that mean? And so this is another way to give an example to follow.
My favorite example of, and this is not CNIT's fault, but actually Blackboard, the company's fault, is in the Blackboard site and the set of tools. If you want to send an email to your students, you have to look it up
Yes.
under S.
Yes, yes, yes.
Right.
For send email. I actually screamed at Blackboard representatives of Blackboard Company when they were here a few years ago, and they duly noted it down, but they haven't changed.
It still says send.
It still says S for send.
Right.
I was thinking of the same thing during your talk.
Okay?
Yes, yes.
Chris, thank you, professors. Specific to your study and the research you've gone over on this topic, how narrowly are you defining information? Is this only for forms and flyers?
Oh, no, I actually think everything we deal with is information. But specifically with information design, very often we focus on things such as forms and maps and websites and that. But indeed, information is around us. And I think what we're doing makes a distinction between data and information. Because data is just out there. It's all of that. And what we're doing is trying to make sense of that and select what is really the most important thing for a particular situation.
Because I'd like to make a comment that you know, this study and this science has everything to do as well with you know, semiotics and
Yes, exactly.
and
Yep.
punctuation
Yep.
and versification
Mhm.
and paragraphing and chapter title.
Yep.
Is there any specific studies or works done on that kind of thing in literature that?
Oh, yeah, there's, yeah.
Literature is
Yeah,
actual
in the,
physical
right,
structure
in design,
of
in the
books?
study, yeah, in the disciplines of design, graphic design. There's a really great journal called Visible Language, which deals with that kind of stuff.
And some of this stuff has just evolved naturally, like indenting paragraphs or
Right.
hanging indents for bibliographies. Hanging indents are visually cool because the last name of the author stands out because it's
Right.
exdented or whatever.
Outdented.
Outdented is the term. And then the rest of the subsidiary information is subsidiary because it's indented by
And this-
a tabs word.
And this kind of marking, of calling out things visually is something, you know, as Geoff says, been going on for centuries. You know, if you think of the term rubrics, you know, that really comes from the red letters, the red words, you know, in medieval manuscripts that were used to call it out. So this is, in a sense, it's not new, but what we're trying to do is to make it more intentional and more purposeful.
There's an old work by the late David Jonasson, The Technology of Text. It's a handbook. And it reviews a lot of the literature on how do we use text to convey information, how do we array text on a page, how do you organize it, I mean, the kinds of questions that you're asking.
One more, part of it is cultural though.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Roman inscriptions, there's no punctuation.
Exactly.
No
there's
spacing.
no spacing, it's
Exactly.
all caps.
Exactly.
There are no signals at all
Right.
that at least as 21st century people we can discern, which makes editing them very difficult.
Yeah, very, very true.
The Greek oracles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
ancient Greek writing and the earliest writing, I think the earliest Greek writing didn't even have the same direction of writing. They wrote first line this way, then the next line this way, then the next line this called as the ox plows. But so which helps if you were following along with your finger as you read. It was very easy, but of course from a distance.
Well, there was space constraints.
Yes, of course, that
Materials
also.
were expensive.
Yep.
And the cultural issue is very important. The design of this form is based on using the English language. How we read from left to right, top to bottom. If it was
Arabic.
right, it would probably be set up differently. And in that regard, design is very culturally contextual. And that gets back to the user-based idea of design. You have to be able to respond to the people who are going to use it. Otherwise, you know, it won't make sense. And the important thing about this is that people read this, understand it, and make the information their own. Because unless the information, you can connect with it, it doesn't make any sense.
I have a very practical question. I can't really read. I'm looking at both the computer screen and that, but I think it's the student fills in what's above the middle
Correct.
line, and someone in the department fills
Correct.
in what's below. How does the student convey to the department staff which one of those boxes needs to be checked?
That's a very good question, and again,
We
that
talked
varies
about that.
from
It-
department to department.
What I've had to do as
Well,
an
you're
advisor
Yeah.
is that I've had to be a mediator between the student and the department, saying, the reason this person needs an override is X, Y, or Z, and then usually the person in the department says, well, I'm just gonna put in a whole bunch of overrides and let's
Right.
hope we hit it.
Right.
I mean, this is the dumbest
Right.
thing about this form. There has to be a way for a student to say, I need help because I'm an undergraduate and I want to take a graduate course, or I need help because it's full and I want to be added and the instructor is given permission, or whatever it is. And there's no place on this form to give that crucial information.
So the student's opinion about which box should be checked.
Well, they should
There's no
say
place for it in there.
in a
Yeah.
sentence,
Right, right.
I need your help because of X, Y, or Z. And then you wouldn't need a person like me as a mediator between the student filling out the form and the department who
Because
actually puts in the
Because part
override.
of the process right now, we understand, is the student brings it to the department, explains the situation, and then the
But
department
there could be a
staff
line
put it
on
in.
this form
Mhm.
where the
Mhm.
student actually
That's a good
explains
point. Yeah.
why they need this.
Now you see why this
See?
was such an interesting process,
Exactly.
because there's stuff about it we didn't think of, but you
Right.
see why it was so complicated.
And this is why it's a draft.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, any other questions, comments about anything? Yeah.
Just as the world gets more kind of, we expect more and more to be able to intuitively sense what needs to happen visually. We're getting kind of like an intuitive visual literacy. And part of it has to do with, we evaluate the status based on the elegance of the design of the information a lot of times. So I find, you know, if I'm going through forums and websites and it's, oh, okay, this makes sense, it's good, it's good design. Going through, particularly some of the Wayne State forms and structures, it's okay, you just, you know what, there's a status issue involved in elegant design, I believe, where you feel something's a higher quality if it's more elegantly designed. If data is presented in an elegant fashion, this is, you know, usable data, this is more useful. If it's static, you know, it may not be usable. It's encyclopedia entries, things like this. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about why Wayne State would, you know, let's really start trying to get something right here, and is there a trend to this?
Well, I think part of it so often is things like forms are not even thought about as design too often. It's like, oh, by the way, oh, we needed a form, let's put something together, you know, or instructions. All right, sure, you know, that's where the tech guys, I did it, let them do the instructions. And so if you, for example, look at the Wayne State form, it's all this information is crammed in there. Part of, I think, the elegance for this that we're looking at is that if the information is organized well, if the flow of things works correctly, and you utilize those visual principles of space, weight, position, composition, all of that stuff, that the beauty of the thing will come through its inherent functionality. Okay, design is not something that makes something pretty. That's where I stand on it. I mean, yes, it should look good. If it's designed, that means that that should happen. But I design from the content. That try to be faithful to the content and true to that, to find out what's being communicated and then how people need to use that. Because if that doesn't happen, I haven't done my job. And so, yes, I know about, you know, typography and spaces and, you know, not to have an orphan, you know, at the last, you know, line. And so I'll take care of that stuff and I'll look at, you know, what is the letting between the lines. You know, I tell my students, don't ever use auto letting. You're designers, you know. And so, because that will adjust how you read things and move through things. So, you know, if you're looking for things that make it, you know, somehow prettier than it is, maybe you can do that, and that's fine. But as long as it works, then I'm okay. Does that answer your question, kind of, sort of?
I'm just interested in the response.
Okay. But I know what you mean. And how many of you think about, like, websites, taking off what you're saying, if the website looks like it's something you can navigate and get to easily, you'll stay with. If it's a mess, you'll go on to something else. See, a lot of heads are shaking here. So that might be part of it, that if the design functions well, if you perceive it as being good or elegant or whatever, you'll stay with it, and hopefully it won't disappoint you in terms of the information.
And of course, the thing is, if you can't go away, if it's a website you have to go to, like registration or filling in your timesheet or something, then you're just going to get annoyed, which is a whole other thing, but it's something that could have been avoided if people had thought about designing it in a more usable way. The problem is to design every form that everybody at Wayne State has to fill out would require an enormous army of designers,
right.
which we don't have and we're not going to hire in the next 6 months.
So, sorry, I have to move on to another things. Are there any other questions or anything? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
These three professors, and remember that this work emanates from a Humanity Center funded working group. And if you have an idea that people from across disciplines can work on, here you have a linguist, a design scholar, and an information scientist working collaboratively on visualization of information. So the Humanity Center has a working groups program that you can participate in. And on the purpose form, it reminds you that the center is now recruiting for next year's series of Brown Bag Talks. So if you're so